Turning now, and much anticipated just now in the conversation between Jack and Roman, is my good friend and colleague Rhonda Haag, the Chief Resilience Officer of Monroe County. She is going to brief us a bit on the work that has progressed since the summit last year with respect to the countywide roads adaptation study. Rhonda, you
Good
are up.
afternoon. Thank
Okay.
you. So I'm Rhonda Haag, the Chief Resilience Officer for Monroe County, also known as the fabulous Florida Keys. So today we're going to talk to you about where we are in the midst of this 2-year study, the Monroe County Roadway Vulnerability Analysis and Capital Plan. Really what this is, it's going to be a plan for how to elevate the roads in the Keys, how high they're going to need to be elevated, when they need to be elevated, and how they're going to be elevated. And along with that comes that hefty price tag that you heard Roman mention. So we're in the middle of this, and we've already done some analysis here. Climate change severely affecting the Keys. We're kind of called ourselves a canary in the coal mine. You see here a neighborhood, that one that Roman mentioned in Key Largo. In this particular street, if nothing is done to elevate the roads by the year 2035, 15 years from now, we're looking at 1.5 feet of water on the road. And then 2045, 2 feet, and then thereon. We're also seeing these king tides higher and more frequent. And it's not just on the county maintained roadway, it's also water coming in on the private properties to the left on the sides of the road. So we have to deal with this issue of both county maintained roadways and what to do with the water on the private properties coming up to the roadways. So we've been very active for the last decade in the Key. We've launched our Green Keys Resilience Plan back in 2016. We've been doing a lot since then because we have to get all this data gathering and modeling done before we can jump into that multi-billion-dollar implementation plan. And so that's what we've been doing the last decade. We're now in that middle of this countywide roads adaptation study. We jump down to that last task. As I said, the ultimate goal of this is to have an actual implementation plan where we can peel off projects as we get the money figured out and how we're going to build them, and to start implementing, hand these off to the engineers and begin our implementation plan. Right now, we're in that task 2, the engineering analysis. We're looking at 311 miles of county maintained roads. That's a lot of miles, and it's spread out over 100 miles through the Keys. And that's over 1,200 different road segments. So a very complex, difficult task. We have to look at all of these, and none of these roads are the same. Very different for our county roads, maintained roads in Key West versus Big Pine Key versus Key Largo. We've collected a lot of data. We've done the mobile LiDAR survey. Also, as part of this study, we have to look at all the critical facilities like hospitals and fire stations and their number of houses, because this all goes into that formula of how we come out with that ultimate plan of which roads to raise and when. And as part of this study, we're developing these inundation maps, not just for sea level rise, but also king tide, because we've already seen how in these 3 or 4 months during the fall king tide, they can very heavily impact a neighborhood. So if we're only planning for sea level rise, we're going to miss out on that king tide inundation. So that's why we're building them together. And as what we're doing, how to rank the roads, we look at vulnerability assessment. How's the water going to affect the roads? It's in terms of groundwater clearance and the surface inundation, storm surge, wave impact. What we found is in just doing the vulnerability assessment, that 45% of our roads are vulnerable to some level of sea level rise by 2045. That's pretty big. Then the second part is we take that vulnerability score from the previous screen and add it into the criticality assessment. I call this the people score. So you don't just raise roads based on how vulnerable they are to sea level rise. You got to look at how they're affected by people. If there's a lot of houses on a particular road, or if there's roadways that have like hospitals or fire stations, they're going to get a higher score. Then you also look at the commercial buildings, the environment and threatened and endangered species, and finally, if it's an evacuation route. So these, what I call the criticality people scores, are going to help elevate some of these roads in a higher manner. And that's what we're looking at. So that's how we're doing this overall score. So when we combine them all together and spit out this ranking system, we're going to take the top 25% and proceed them to the next phase. And we're going to do the engineering concept evaluation. And this is where we're going to actually do some designs of what road adaptations are going to look like in these different neighborhoods. So there's not going to be any one solution, no one road elevation. It's going to be very different for different neighborhoods. And this is a typical example, the one we did in Key Largo. On the left is how it looks currently. On the right is how it might look. And make sure you look at that water coming up to the road on the right, because just because we raise a road doesn't mean the water stops coming in on low elevated yards. So that's something we're looking at also. And this is again another example of it. If we raise the road, it still leaves a very low lots. We have to look at our policies and to determine what are we going to do or allow in terms of our policies and allowing these residents to either raise their homes, which we do have a lot of elevations in our core plan, or raise their lots or whatever. So a very significant piece. And then when you're building higher roads, you also have to look at your right-of-ways, because typically they're going to be wider. If you look at that yellow line, that's the proposed new right-of-way. And so now we're encroaching into people's front yards. So how are we going to do that? Are we going to buy that yard? Are we going to, eminent domain, or just get right-of-way? So these are some of the difficulties that what have when you're building wider roads. And so the cost and funding, we already heard Roman talk about it. We're up to about 1.8 billion countywide. Might be a little more or less depending on how the next 6 months go. And then one particular neighborhood in Key Largo was $21 million. That's the 1.8 miles. So we feel confident that we can move forward with this $2 billion plan. We did it already with the 1 billion wastewater, and we just need to figure out ways to fund this. And we have a good team on board. We have good county administrator and commissioners, and they're all committed to moving this resilience plan for the Keys forward. And as Roman also mentioned, I don't know why the next slide isn't coming, but we're doing some temporary measures. The aqua dam that he talked about, well, let's go back to this one. The policy components, again, what we need to do with the private residents here when the lots are flooding after we raise the roads, and also what we're going to do in the rural areas. We don't need to put the expensive permitting stormwater system in these rural roads. We might just be able to raise them. This will be a very big decrease in cost. And again, partnership with residents, very, very important. As the levels of seas continue to rise and Florida Bay rises and the ocean rises, we might see these incoming inundations into the yard. So even if we have the elevated roads, we're going to need to work with the residents on what to do with these lots that might start flooding now. This is the flood protection that Roman talked about. That orange thing on the left-hand side is along Florida Bay. So it's stopping the tidal waters from coming in from Florida Bay over that road. Very successful, $50,000. And that's what it looked like last year during the 2019 flooding. And then looking back, so again, we've undergone a decade of modeling here. We're now under this study where we're figuring out what it's going to be our implementation plan for the next 25 years to the year 2045. We're very confident that we can come up with the designs and engineerings to make this work. It's really now looking forward to how to fund this and move forward with the resilience plans and the Keys. So thank you very much.